So did you hear Diablo Immortal is back? That's right, it's back in closed alpha, and today I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the Cycle of Strife. This is the most amazing game mode in Diablo Immortal. This is a PvP endgame mode that we've all been waiting for. I'm so excited. Let's get into it. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Captain Nemo. Welcome to another Diablo Immortal video. This is a very special one. Immortal is back. It's back with closed alpha, and today we're talking about the Cycle of Strife, the most amazing game mode I've ever heard of. I am so excited about this. I'm gonna have to slow myself down and speak a little bit slower because I cannot contain myself. This is awesome. So remember, this video is going to be chaptered, so you can skip around anytime you like via those chapters. While you're down there, you want to make sure you smash that like button, hit the subscribe, and stay tuned. I have so much stuff coming for you about the Cycle of Strife, Heliquary, all the updates, changes, live streams. We are going to go all day long here. Make sure you stay tuned for all of that. So what is the Cycle of Strife? What is it all about? Well, it's a PvP endgame activity that's server-wide and faction-based. There are two factions, Immortals and the Shadows. This whole thing happens per server, and there's a battle, a seasonal tug of war, so to speak, between them. The season lasts between 1 to 3 months, and they haven't decided which yet. They'll finalize on that later. And of course, during that season, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. All of this can lead to permanent glory. That's right, permanent glory for the life of the server, because all of the records are kept on the server and anyone can look them up at any time. It's really cool. I'll talk more about that later. But just remember that the Cycle of Strife at high level is a PvP endgame activity between the Immortals and the Shadows as they fight for permanent glory. Let's talk about more. So, and just before we get into all the rest of the details about who, what, how, this is really exciting. I can't wait. We're going to talk about the lore because you need to understand why this is all happening. In fact, if you really think about it, we actually get to find out why this game is called Diablo Immortal. I'm really excited. So back in the day, there was an entity, a creator, a builder called Diadessa. Okay, she wanted to protect Sanctuary. And what she did was she created an artifact called the Eternal Crown. And she gave it to her son. Her son's name is Kion. And she said, you are in charge of protecting Sanctuary. He created a guardian group called the Immortals. And the Immortals were in charge of protecting Sanctuary from hell itself. Now, Diadessa knew that she couldn't fully trust Kion and the Immortals because she needed basically a checks and balances, a system, someone else who'd be able to check and make sure that the Immortals are always worthy and up to the task to protect Sanctuary, keep them basically at their bay, test them and make sure that they are always ready. So she gave that task to her daughter. Her daughter's name was Akiba. So Kion created the Immortals and Akiba created another group called the Shadows. The Shadows were in charge of basically testing the Immortals, testing their weaknesses, trying to infiltrate them in any way possible to make sure that they are ready. And if a day came that the Shadows overtook the Immortals, they would then cycle would switch and they would become immortal themselves. So that's kind of the back end story. You have the Diadessa who created the Eternal Crown. She gave it to Kion, who's in charge of created a group called the Immortals, who is in charge of basically protecting Sanctuary. And then you have Akiba, who's in the back, who's in with the Shadows, making sure that Kion and the Immortals are up to the task. And that's what created the eternal battle between the Shadows and the Immortals in something called the Cycle of Strife. Ooh, are you still with me? This is so exciting. I'm just getting started. We are just getting started. Okay, so now that we have the backstory here, let's talk about some of the rules here. Okay, there can only be 500 Immortals per server. This is very important. There can only be up to 500 Immortals per server. There could be a potentially unlimited amount of Shadows. There could be pretty much as many as you want. You really, if you think about it. Now they do basically cap how many Shadows can be created at once. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but basically you can think of it this way. There's a potentially an unlimited amount with a cap of how often the Shadows can be created. Now, Immortal's goal, of course, is to stay immortal, and the Shadow's goal is, of course, to overthrow the Immortals and become immortal themselves. There are rewards that are very specific to each faction you pick. This is completely opt-in. You do not have to play it if you don't want to. You won't lose anything whatsoever. You will not lose on any progress. You won't lose on anything if you do not decide to play the Circle of Strife. But if you want to, you can opt in and get into the battle, get into all the action. So let's talk about it. What else happens there? There's a lot of adventures here. By the way, the people that are not shadows or immortals, they're called the adventurers. Talk about that. So there's shadows, they're immortals, and they are the adventurers, the people that aren't either. So the shadows are locked in and cannot be dropped or subbed. So if you are a shadow, you are a shadow for the rest of the season. If you're an immortal, you are allowed to be subbed in and out. The leader and the lieutenants, we'll talk about the roles of the immortals as well, are allowed to do that. So you can sub out and sub in if you're immortal. If you're a shadow, you're locked in for the rest of the season. Keep that in the back of your head as we keep going with this. All right, so you say, why would you want to be immortal? What are some of the positives about immortal? Because there are positives for being an immortal and for being a shadow. Really, it's up to you. It's really exciting. God, I love this. Okay, positives about the immortal. Number one, a wall of honor. A wall of honor can be viewed in Westmarch. This is where you can basically lay your history down. This is a place where the server will keep the history of every immortal leader and lieutenant and what happened during their reign. So if you are one of those, you can basically put yourself down in the history books, literally. It's really cool. So the records of the history of the server, the leads, the four lieutenants, and of course their details. Now, what else do you get? There's limited cosmetics that you get as well. There's special cloaks for members, elites, leads, and lieutenants. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So you get cosmetics, you get the Wall of Honor, where basically, like I said, it displays what you did. And if you're the immortal leader, if you're the leader of the immortals, you also get a statue. That's right, one person in each server is going to have their own statue for their reign. So as long as they're the leader of the immortals, there's going to be a statue in Westmarch of them, of their gear, of their details, of everything. So who is going to be the first immortal leader in each server? Is that going to be you? Let me know down below in the comments what you think about this. Is this exciting? Are you going to be a lieutenant? Are you going to be a leader? Are you going to go for that top dog spot? I cannot wait. Okay, let's talk about more. What else is happening? So what else do you get besides the Wall of Honor? So much more. For example, Kion's Ordeal. That's a 48-player raid. That's right, a 48-player raid that is only available to the immortals. They can do this. Now, in a 48-player raid, there's actually 4 teams of 12. So there's 4 teams of 12 players that are attempting to kill 4 different bosses. It's a timed activity. It's actually super fun. It seems like there's a lot of coordinations going on between the 4 teams, and a total of 48 players can participate. And if they beat it, if they complete the raid, they get a bunch of rewards. They also get a buff for their entire faction. In fact, they get a buff for everybody who is not a shadow in the server. So if Kion's Ordeal is completed, they get, everybody who is not a shadow in the server gets something called the Blessing of Diadessa. The Blessing of Diadessa increases your Elder Rift rewards. You get better rewards for running Elder Rifts if you have the Blessing of Diadessa. And the only way to get that, of course, is to beat Kion's Ordeal. If you are an immortal, you can do that with 4 teams of 12, a 48 team total. Now, this is really exciting. Now, there's a bunch of rules, actually. So, for example, the Kion's Ordeal has to be refreshed every 7 days. Immortals have to beat this again every 7 days, and if they don't, it gets switched over to the Shadows. Really exciting. And Immortals do this to basically increase their dominance. It's kind of like faction progression, if you think about it. But there's a lot of other stuff involved that's really cool. Now, so everybody who is in the server that's not a shadow gets the Blessing of Diadessa, and that increases your Elder Rift rewards. What it also does is it gives you these extra gear. It gives you a bunch of really cool, rare, awesome gear that gets deposited into a vault called the Immortal Vault. So what is that all about? The Immortal Vault is really cool. So as non-shadows run Elder Rifts and complete them, rare gear gets deposited into this vault. It appears in this vault, and the vault starts getting full. If the vault is intact, by the end of the week, the riches get split between the faction. Now, when I talk about how can the vault not be intact, we'll talk about that in a second. But that's basically the idea. You just fill up this vault by doing Elder Rifts. If you have the Blessing of Diadessa by completing the Kion's Ordeal, you're able to do this. So that's really cool. You collect gear. At the end of the week, boof, you get this awesome gear. Great. And what else do you get as being an immortal, there's a lot of other stuff that you get, but being an immortal leadership you get buffs. These are really cool, like extra adds that you get. So remember we talked about this before. You get unique cloaks, right? There's four different members, so to speak, of a faction. You have just somebody who's called a member, so that's going to be just a regular immortal. Then you have the immortal elite. Then you have the immortal lieutenant, and there are four of those, four special different ones. And then you have the immortal leader. Okay, one leader with the statue and all that good stuff. Now, the immortal leader and the full lieutenants, they get special buffs. They also, of course, get the cloaks, right? Every member gets a special cloak. It's only unlocked. I mean, it's just for the looks, obviously, but they look really cool. They're very unique and different. A member cloak is one way. You have an elite cloak. You have lieutenant cloak, and then you have the leader's cloak, which is, of course, very unique, and it's only to one person. So, who are the lieutenants? There are actually four different lieutenants. It's really cool. There is a Hand of Iron lieutenant, Shadowbreaker lieutenant. You have a Hope's Dawn lieutenant, and a Pathfinder lieutenant. Four different ones, and the leader, and each one of those four lieutenants and the leader have different buffs. So if you're holding that position, you get a buff. So like, for example, a leader would get an AoE buff, and the Shadowbreaker lieutenant would get a group crit buff. There's all kinds of things like that going on. It's really cool if you think about it. So by holding that position, you do get a buff, but it's almost like a group setting buff. So if you have the leader and the full lieutenants together, that seems to be like a really cool combination. So that's kind of like what you get as an immortal. You get some buffs, you get the cloaks, and you get, of course, all those activities that we talked about. Well, what about the shadows? What do you get if you're a shadow on the other side? What if you want to be one of those? Let's talk about that. Now, what do you get when you're a shadow? When you're on the other side of it, right? Now, cool part about being a shadow, of course, you can have almost unlimited amount of shadows. There's only 500 immortals up to. There could be an unlimited amount of shadows. There is a way you can register for a shadow, something called a dark house. There's a lot of stuff that's going on when you are a shadow, a lot of different activities, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. So dark houses and assemblies. What's a dark house? It's like a sub-guild within the faction of shadows themselves, and each sub-guild basically competes for rankings. How does this work? It's basically a measure of activity, of engagement of each of your house members. So each one of the shadows that's in your house has to be obviously as active as possible and do a whole bunch of variety of things, and that increases the rank of your own dark house as they compete for the top 10 spots. And we'll talk about why you need to be in the top 10. But the more members that participate, the higher you go. The assemblies are basically a way for you to form a dark house. During an assembly, and it only runs for 8 hours, 2 days out of the week. I'm not kidding you. So for 8 hours, 2 days out of the week. So for Wednesdays and Saturdays, from 2 to 10 p.m. is when assemblies run. Wednesdays and Saturdays, this is very important why you'd want to make sure you pick the right time zone for your server when you're playing. And we'll talk about exactly how the servers are going to work and all of that in next few videos. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of details about some changes for Immortal. But what's going to happen here is every Wednesday and Saturday from 2 to 10 p.m., people are going to be able to, or shadows are going to be able to register and form dark houses only during those times. This is how they control the amount of shadows that are going to be available on the server. So here we are. Assemblies run 8 hours a day, Wednesdays and Saturdays, and that's the only time that you can create or join a dark house. Now, you don't have to be part of the dark house. You can be a houseless shadow and still do most of the activities, except for one thing, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's kind of how it works. This is what a dark house and an assembly is, an activity that's specifically for the shadows. Now next, this is a really cool activity. It's called Raid the Vault. Remember how we talked about the vault on the Immortal side? How if you filled it up all the way, and if it was intact by the end of the week, you would get those rewards. Well, the shadows can make sure that they raid it and make sure that it's not intact. So what they can do is you and up to 3 of your friends, they don't have to be in the same dark house or in the same guild, to be honest with you. You just kind of form them together. I think it's basically a grouping thing. You can attempt to steal the riches in the vault. And this is at first a PvE activity that then turns into PvP. It's really cool. So how does it work? It starts as a PvE activity against the NPC guards within the vault itself. There's certain actions that need to be done or not done Otherwise, you trigger basically an alarm. So if you don't trigger this alarm, you can just kill the NPCs and raid the vault. If you do, that will alert the Immortals. And the Immortals that are active on the server and that are, there can join in. And that's when this goes from PvE to PvP. And that's when you start fighting. And of course, the NPCs are still there. It's kind of like a cool little thing. It almost reminds me of like Overwatch, kind of. It's really cool. So this battle happens. Now, if you're a shadow and you get defeated, nothing happens. The Immortals just kind of go, huh? And they defend the vault and go on their way. If you're a shadow and you defeat the Immortals in this battle, that's when basically no more Immortals can come in. And then you are free to raid the vault to your desire. So if the Immortals win, the vault gets defended. If the shadows win, no more Immortals can join and you can continue raiding the vault like you were. That is what's called raid the vault, and all of the shadows can participate in that. So you think it was over? Nope, we're just getting started. The next really awesome thing that I'm going to tell you about is the Rite of Exile. So Rite of Exile is like another one of those things that happens for the shadows. What is the Rite of Exile? Remember how I told you if you're a houseless shadow, you can do almost everything? This is one of the things that you cannot do unless you're part of a dark house. This is basically a system that keeps track of the rising dark houses. Remember how I told you that they compete for the top 10 spots? Well, once a correct stage is reached, this system triggers an event and opens up an event called the Rite of Exile. This is a battle between the Immortals and the shadows. It's once a week, and the top 10 dark houses can send 8 of their own strongest shadows to fight the Immortals. So top 10 dark houses send 8 shadows each. So that's 80 shadows that go in to face the Immortals. And an Immortal leader and the lieutenant can face in or send in the Immortals to battle them. This is a simultaneous 8v8 10 instance battle that happens all at once and is decided individually. So there's 10 different battles of 8v8 players that are going to be fighting. If at least half of those battles are won by the Immortals, nothing changes. The Immortals keep their position and they stay immortal. If more than half or half or more of those events are won by the shadows, the cycle switches and the shadows now become the new Immortals. This is pretty crazy. I know. I love it. This is really, really cool. Now for Alpha, there's going to be a bit of a change, a bit of a difference. It doesn't really going to affect anybody, but the top dark houses will become the Immortal because it's the first season. But other than that, if half of those are won by the shadows, it turns and switches. So the Immortals have to defend their position. The leader and the lieutenants will send in 80 of their best Immortals that will go up against the 80 shadows in this Rite of Exile battle that gets triggered as soon as the top 10 dark houses reach a certain level. I know, this is absolutely crazy, but wait, there is more. There's something called the Battleground. A Battleground is basically, you can access it in Westmarch, and it's the public version of the Rite of Exile. You know how in the Rite of Exile, you have the top 10 dark houses, you have the Immortals, you have to opt into these activities and all that good stuff. Well, Battleground is basically a way to practice that without anything. So like you could just go in, queue in by yourself or with some friends and do the 10v10, 8v, the 10 player 8v8 battles, but basically just go in and do an 8v8 PvP mode where you go in by yourself or with your friends. There is no private Battleground matches, so it is a public event that you have to enter, but it is available to anybody. You do not have to be in the Cycle of Strife to play it, so that's kind of cool. It's 8v8, attackers versus defenders. You queue up and play whenever you want as a single player or as a group. It's really cool, so you can practice for it for the Cycle of Strife or just go in and do some PvP if you want to. I really like this. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is just so much more, but I can't make this video 3.5 hours. If you made it this far, make sure to let me know down below. #baited, because I give you props and kudos. I mean, this is really exciting. When I listened to this, I was like, I couldn't believe it. This is the most exciting thing I've ever heard. But there was more. That's right, there's a lot more. I don't know if you've heard, if you've seen Echo's video today, or if you want to watch some of my videos tomorrow and the next day, but I'm giving you a lot more details about the Heliquary, about the rest of the crazy changes that are happening with Immortal, a bunch of other stuff. We're going to get all into it. Make sure you stay tuned here for tomorrow's video. I'm really excited about this. Let me know what you think about the Cycle of Strife here. Like, are you going to get into it? Are you going to play it? Are you going to be a Shadow? Are you going to be an Immortal? What is going to... Can't wait. I would love to hear what you have to say about it. I cannot wait to live stream some more Immortal. Of course, I'm playing it right now. This is really, really exciting. Stay tuned for all of that. While you're here, check out this video, and I'll see you tomorrow for more Immortal stuff. Can't wait. Take care.